Forrest was the first son born to Miriam and William Forrest. He was born on July 13, 1821, near Chapel Hill, Tennessee. In 1841, Nathan Forrest moved to Hernando, Mississippi to live and go into business with his uncle. Uncle Forrest was killed in a duel in 1845 after an argument with the Matlock brothers. Nathan, in retaliation, shot and killed both of them and killed the other two with a Bowie knife. In 1826, he married Mary Ann Montgomery. They then moved to Memphis and he became a slave trader selling slaves down the river. He had ranches, he had real estate, he had farms. He was selling Negroes like stock on the stock market. Forrest Jones and Company, one of the biggest slave traders of the South. Nathan sold thousands of slaves during his time, profited hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was a millionaire for his time. He had them all. Come down to Forrest and Jones and Company. He opened a second trading post in 1858. He had Congo slaves. He had prime Wynwood slaves. He had coastal Africans. He had them all. He had healthy Negroes. When the Civil War started, Forrest had an invested interest. June 14, 1861, Forrest reported for duty for the Confederate States Army. Forrest offered to buy horses and equipment for a regiment of volunteer soldiers. Forrest was a brutal genius. Forrest was evil. They called him the Devil Forrest on the battlefield. The Civil War was an ugly and brutal war, leaving destruction and death in its path. Forrest led that path of death and destruction. Fort Pillow, Tennessee, April 12, 1864. Even though those boys surrendered, Devil Forrest ordered to shoot those boys dead, massacred 557 men. This was a slaughter. After this, he earned the name as the Butcher Forrest. After the surrender of General Lee and the Union had won the war, Forrest headed back to Memphis. He got together with some of his old friends, Confederate officers, the founding fathers of the KKK. Nathan Forrest was the first Grand Wizard. He was their evil hero. They were inspired by the Knights of Malta. This is where they borrowed their initiation and rituals. They were a military wing of the Democrat Party to intimidate free men with torture, violence, and murder. Forrest even bragged about shooting Republicans in the face and then lied to Congress about his KKK involvement. Forrest said that the KKK had disbanded, but just like a Democrat, he was full of lies. Woodrow Wilson was born on December 28, 1856, to Joseph and Jessie Wilson. His father was a pastor and supporter of the Confederate Army. Woodrow Wilson was a slow student, had dyslexia. He didn't learn to read until he was 10 years old. Wilson later did well in school, had a spark of evil genius. Woodrow was very intelligent. He got accepted to Johns Hopkins University. This is where he became radicalized. He met his best bud, Thomas Dixon Jr., the author of The Klansman. In 1886, he received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University. Wilson became a sought-out professor after teaching at Brian Meyer and Wesleyan University. Wilson became a professor at Princeton University. In his writings, The State and Division and Review, Wilson wrote the blueprint for the modern-day welfare state. In June 1902, Wilson had been promoted to the president of Princeton. In 1911, Wilson became governor of New Jersey. But Wilson had his sights on bigger things. In 1912, he became Democrat presidential nominee. Howard Taft was president. Taft was good friends with Theodore Roosevelt, but Theodore Roosevelt started the Moose Party because he didn't like how Taft was running the country. Republican Party was split, so it made it easy for Wilson to win the election. Wilson became the 28th President of the United States. It didn't take long before the Klan sympathizer showed his true colors. He segregated black and white in the government. Wilson had the Democrat Plantation at full steam. While the Klan was growing in numbers. Wilson had always been a Klan advocate. His good friend Dixon Jr. inspired the birth of a nation after all. The president had his first screening ever at the White House, racist Klan film, The Birth of a Nation. When the country found out about the screening, Wilson denied it. And then later he said the screening took place, but he did not attend and he was not aware. Wilson's actions spoke otherwise. His policies were overtly racist and discriminatory, denying blacks good white-collar jobs. Should have been no surprise Wilson was a Confederate sympathizer and KKK advocate. At this time, the Klan's number grew on the rise. A lot of black folk got off the plantation. They headed to Republican states where there was prosperity, good paying jobs, good schools for the kids. They didn't have to struggle. Black folks arrived to Republican states in droves. Better jobs and better pay for their labor. These were prosperous times for black folk. This is when the Black Wall Street started. Blacks even had their own banks. Wilson was wondering, where did all my slaves go? But Wilson was an evil genius. He had another plan. To understand this, we got to go back to 1910 with Senator Aldrich. Aldrich was a globalist. He believed that the European banking system was much more superior. He worked with globalist bankers and economists on a plan. They all jumped on a train and headed to Jekyll Island, Georgia. Some may have asked, why take a train ride down the East Coast for a meeting? This is where it really gets interesting. Aldrich and his globalist bankers had a sinister plan. Darkness of night. In 1910, they crafted a plan that would change America forever. Devise a way with factional banking to destroy America's financial system and wealth. This would be a higher form of slavery, debt slaves. This site was chosen for a specific reason, something more diabolical. Long before the elite built cabins and made this their resort, this was the land of the Timucua tribe. Rockefellers bought this plot in 1905. They built a cottage and called it Indian Mound. This is the house where the Federal Reserve Act was drafted. As you drive through the neighborhood of the elite cottages, just think there used to be Timucua huts, ritual sites, sacrificial sites, and even shaman huts. Where all these houses were built, on top of them used to be Timucua settlements. The Timucua thrived in this diverse biological region in the southeast of the United States. There were 35 chiefdoms. When the Spaniards first arrived, they noticed the Timucua's great stature. Some had said to be 7 to 8 feet tall. There were skeletons even found in the Indian mounds to confirm this. From Florida to Georgia, the Timucua had large communities. The Timucua had very distinctive agricultural practices. They called this method the Three Sisters. When the Timucua elders became concerned with Europeans establishing settlements, there was a clash of the different civilizations. Also from the European diseases, the population crashed because the Timucua were not immune. But the evidence of the Timucua culture is still there to this day. There were most unsavory and evil practices were sacrificing their children to their god. Archaeologists have said these stones resemble Canaanite sacrificial stones. Here is an actual sacrificial stone in Newport Richey, Florida. Also, there is residue of corn, bones, blood, and ash.
The house on top of the blood sacrifice altar. He said, well, Rockefeller said, you're standing right on top of the altar right now. This is the room that is built on top of it. The room that they were sitting in when they drew up the entire legislation and plan to pass it that became the Federal Reserve Act. So this was the conception of the Federal Reserve banking system on the parlors sitting on top of a blood sacrifice altar.
Where babies were sacrificed.
Yes. And so all of a sudden it's like, wow, no wonder our banking system has so much corruption in it, even when people want to do the right thing. The idea that it was conceived like this, I'm going, this is not just a bunch of wealthy guys that got away for vacation and came up with a profitable business plan. This has got something diabolical, something occultic about it, something evil that's wrapped up with it.
Wilson and his evil globalists brought the Federal Reserve Act, drafted with the most wicked intentions. President Wilson signed it into law December 23rd, 1913. He made William McAdoo the first chairman of the Federal Reserve. Believe it or not, Mr. McAdoo was Wilson's son-in-law. Shortly after, the printing presses kicked in overdrive. This was the day the globalists made Americans debt slaves, when America's real wealth just burned away. Stalin, the second dictator of the Soviet Union, accelerated the Gulag, which meant to re-educate through labor. 500 camps created the Communist Gulag Archipelago. This was an oppressive criminal system of slavery. Just like the Democrats, the Communists had their plantation too. They were the first, created in 1918. The Solovki Island was the Communists' first testing grounds. The first subject was loaded on a boat. Political prisoners. They even had their own socialists, anarchists, clergymen, or anyone they deemed a threat to the Bolsheviks. They called the guards the watchmen. They were common criminals. The commander of the camp was Alexander Nortiv. He welcomed the newcomers with these words: "You can forget all the rights you once had. We have our own rules here." They said a step to the left or a step to the right would be deemed as an attempt to escape and would be shot on sight. The torment and torture done to the slaves were pure sadism. At the center of the communist hell was the monks' church. This was to be used as an execution center. Prisoners called it the Hell of the Axe. The victims were attached to a heavy weight and then thrown down off a 375-step staircase. The communists destroyed all Christian artifacts, replacing them with linen statues and pictures. Thousands of priests and monks were arrested. It was called the Campaign of Seizure. Thousands were deported to the camps. Communities treated them like animals. Public trials were held and hundreds were executed. The monastery was not just chosen to be a testing ground by accident. It was a plan of pure evil. This plantation was the model of the Communist Party. During this time, the Gulag was called the Ghost Lager and controlled by the Cheka. 12-hour workdays, 1 day off every 10 days. This was pure slavery. Raymond Duguet exposed Slovatsky in 1927. This was in his book, A Prison in Red Russia. As the spotlight of truth shined on the communists released a propaganda film to the world. Slavotsky is a summer camp filled with music, entertainment, and games. This film was released in 1928. The communists said, "This is not a hell, this is a heaven." Famous Marxist author Maxim Gorky wrote propaganda piece for the communists. He said that the labor camps would eliminate prisons. Yet the Gulag was a prison among itself. They literally worked people to death. The communists said, work the slaves as hard as you can for 3 months. After that, they're better off dead. They call this the birth of a new man through labor. Due to the truth getting out, the communists ordered a mass execution of over 300 men. They lied, said a prison break was organized, so they executed the man. No trial, no jury, just shot and thrown in a pit. Some were even thrown in the pit still alive. They didn't want to waste their bullets. Lenin's reign of terror was a reign of red death. Lenin was pure evil. He brought a path of death and destruction. After Lenin died in January 1924, the evil did not die with him. The communist demon found another host in Stalin. Stalin was moving in secret to murder or exile Trotsky. Trotsky was the only one standing in Stalin's way to becoming the new dictator. Stalin and his henchmen took control, exiling Trotsky. Stalin's first major project for the communist slaves was the construction of the canal from the White Sea to the Baltic Sea. In 1931, they started the construction, which was known as the BBK. Stalin rail-carted thousands of slaves for this project. This was the Communist Plantation. 120,000 slaves dug with primitive tools made by hand. The prisoners dug 141 miles by hand. 24 miles was carved through rock, 19 locks, and 64 dams. They were watched by the watchmen. This was Stalin's plan to become a major industrial power. Why use machines when you can exploit human beings?
These cables, all of them actually, were old and sharp. They were made of barbed wire. Our hands were wounded, blood was flowing, people often fell. As spring drew closer and the snow started to melt, we could see hands, arms, and heads popping up next to us. 150 meters away, we saw all of this. It stuck out from under the snow and the soil. And flocks of crows flew over the frozen corpses, still fresh, after pecking them.
Conditions were subhuman. Look at their beds. Communist musicians played communist songs while slaves worked away to help boost morale. May 1933, Stalin inaugurated the canal. He hailed it as a great success, celebrated as a communist victory. But this was a lie. The canal would rarely be used. It was too shallow. Over 25,000 slaves paid in blood just because Stalin wanted to show a tufa or a bluff. Stalin's next project that would be paid for in blood was Kolyma. Slaves were rail carted to the east coast of USSR, then took a boat 2 weeks to get to Kolyma. This Siberian wilderness was almost unexplored except for a few reindeer farmers. Stalin wanted to exploit the gold in the Kolyma for his empire.
It was the 25th of December. It was called Kulu. And it's on that boat that we were brought to the Nagaev Bay. We disembarked, we all had civilian clothes. We were freezing. Many of us had their nose or ears frozen. Sometimes even fingers and toes. It was awful.
Communist slaves said Kolyma was called the White Crematorium. The plantation was where men went to die.
For us to dig by hand. Can you imagine what it means to dig by hand when it's minus 50? Dig the ground with a spike. The norm was to dig 10 holes a day, and each had to be 60 or 70 centimeters deep, at least. And that was in a permafrost area, frozen land. It was awful.
This man worked 17 years in Kolyma, 16 hours a day, and he was a former communist comrade. Communists evicted people from their farms. They called them kulaks.
They moved from house to house and took everything, up to the last seed. And they did the same for us. They took everything. They forced our family to certain starvation.
Stalin then started collectivism. All grain and crops go to the state. During this time, the crops were property of the state. Kulaks were the scapegoats. Collectivism led to famine and starvation. Mao Zedong, the first dictator of the CCP. His plantation was called the Laogai. First started in 1927, used against the KMT nationalists. During this time, Mao and the communists fought against the nationalists and the KMT. The Laogai was used to torture the KMT nationalists during this time of civil war. After the war with Japan, the Laogai system became even more brutal against the KMT. Mao was the commander of the Red Guard. He became very popular. He rose quickly in the ranks of chairmen. He was worshipped as if he was a god. When he was the commander of the Red Guard, he had dreams of ruling China as a dictator. He got sadistic pleasure watching people be tortured and murdered in the Laogai. Mao's actions were of a real psychopath. He said he was willing to murder 50% of his people to become the world's supreme leader. At that time, the demon of the Democide entered Mao. At the age of 22, he read Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto. This was like his Bible. Another favorite was Darwin's Origin of the Species. Mao kept a copy of Machiavelli's The Prince and Discourses on hand as a reference guide. Mao started the Great Leap Forward. Private industry is banned. Everything goes to the state to build the military-industrial complex. Every kernel of seed and every stalk of grain is now owned by the state. Mao said he would take China into the future, creating a communist utopia. Mao said he would do it in 15 years. Every stalk of grain is owned by the state. No private market, no private training. It went straight from the field to the state granaries. The peasant farmers were stripped of their property. They were forced to live and work on collective farms. All houses of landowners were confiscated, forcing them to be homeless. All livestock was confiscated as well. Farmers that once had abundance now work for rations. The rations kept them on the edge of starvation. The elder grew weak, so they couldn't work, as well as the children because they were too young. No work, no rations, no food. The dark cloud of communists brought hunger, famine, and starvation. The Great Leap Forward was really the Great Famine. Mao, the sociopath, knew what he had become and what he had done. Instead of blaming himself, Mao blamed the birds. Mao ordered every bird to be killed. Communists started killing every sparrow they see to show their admiration for Mao and the Communist Party. The more the sparrows you killed, the more you loved the state. Mao's wickedness made matters worse. God created birds for a specific reason. They're very important to the ecosystem. Birds eat insects, bugs, pests, locusts, and grubs that destroy crops. The famine had accelerated, murdering millions. The famine murdered 30 to 50 million people. The communist propaganda machine said the Great Leap Forward was a great success. Mao seen the studies and documents that proved the famine was man-made. Until this day, there are no photos or film of the villages and villagers that died from the famine. The villages were closed off. People were left there to starve to death. Mao knew none could be trusted, not even his senior comrades. With his psychopath sense, Mao got a whiff of an unloyal rat. Mao decided to expand his Great Leap Forward in a meeting in 1959. Lu Shaoqi, number 2, spoke the truth. He showed the documents that proved the famine was man-made at this important meeting. He was brave to speak against the will of Mao. Mao was furious. He felt betrayed and outsmarted. Lu Shaoqi was well liked and admired by the Communist Party. Mao, being the psychopath he moved in slow for the kill. September 1967, Mao ordered a decree through the propaganda machine to round up all his political enemies. Liu Shaoqi was arrested by the Red Guard and sent to a Laogai. He was beaten, tortured, but Mao had special plans for his special enemy. Liu Shaoqi was a diabetic. Mao withheld all his medications and insulin so he could die a slow and painful death. Then Mao ordered his guards to film his slow death so he could watch with his evil pleasure. Mao was a psychopath of the highest degree. In 1964, Mao published his Red Book. Mao's Red Book was the quotes and writings of a madman. War is a continuation. The dust. Crimson with our blood. It created a culture phenomenon. The younger generations worship Mao. In actuality, Mao used the book to create a generation of psychopaths in his image. Mao knew that he needed the younger generation to turn them against the older generation. Communism is a form of political cannibalism. They always eat their own. Mao gave unyielded power to go after the teachers and the elders. Soon after, China turned into a cultural wasteland. All the books, music, and art that was not approved by Mao was burned and destroyed. Mao appointed his wife, Jean Quinn, also known as Madame Mao. She was an actress and a communist revolutionary. Mao could only trust her with these plans. Visual propaganda was at its peak. Mao was worshipped as a god. The younger generation was turned against the elders.
I can remember as though it were yesterday watching a group of strongly built students, including some of my own classmates, boys who practiced martial arts, jump up onto the platform to beat our headmaster. By the time it ended, he no longer looked like a human being. His face had been beaten so severely you couldn't tell where his nose or eyes were. It was just a black mess. When I saw that, my heart froze.
destroying the moral right and respect of the elders. Teachers were publicly humiliated by the Red Guard. The elder communists were sent to re-education camps. Mao ordered the destruction of all religious artifacts, Buddhist, Hindu, and Christian, and pictures were replaced with statues and pictures of Mao. Communism was their religion, and Mao was their god.
We thought Mao was the incarnation of truth, so we accepted without question everything he said. If he said someone was a bad person, then for us he was a bad person. Every one of his words was truth.
The Red Guard was given the green light to do whatever they want. Police forces were to leave them alone. Mao praises the Red Guard's action, allowing them to get even more violent. The Communist Cultural Revolution turned into a communist cult, just as Mao planned. They did what they wanted, and they took what they wanted too.
When the Red Guards rose up, there was a movement to search and confiscate. My elder brothers took part, and so did I. Sometimes we went to the police and said, this family is a landlord family. They're bad people. We're going to search and confiscate. Then we might find forbidden literature, a rare edition of the Golden Lotus with an ivory carved binding. We'd say to each other, look, they've got dirty books.
My school was in the suburbs, quite a long way from the town. So we searched and ransacked the homes of the former landlords and rich peasants in the countryside. It was the middle school children who went after them. They killed almost all of the former landlords in the villages around our school. Cannibalism became quite common, at least in Xinjiang. People cut off pieces of flesh from the thighs of bodies they found lying outside and brought them home to cook. There were also cases of people eating the living, the most extreme examples being those who ate their own children. People were not afraid of the dead, they feared the living, because the living might eat you.
Mao's communist utopia was nothing more than a communist hell, ran by a demon-possessed madman. Mao, the biggest mass murder in history. Democide. Whether you're on the Democrat plantation looking just to run away, or if you're on the Communist Plantation just looking to escape. Because you know both only bring death and destruction. Total enslavement. Inhumane. No guns, no property, no rights, no freedom. Collectivism is a game that leads to hunger, famine, and complete starvation. If you don't think the Communist Plantations come to America, think again, because they're already here.
Moscow's agent Joseph Hogani.
I am Leonard Patterson, the Communist Party, because I trained with them at the Lenin University in Moscow. The Negro people in this country as cannon fodder.
For 9 years, I was a member of the Communist Party, serving as an undercover agent for the FBI. Time, I learned that the communist conspiracy been planning and working for years bring violent revolution to America.